Welcome to RPL's The Vote. Exploring Voting Rights in American series is sponsored by the Massachusetts Humanities. I'm local history and reference librarian Anne Barrett. I also have with me Melissa Selden. She's a new reference librarian. She's also going to be co-hosting with me. Tonight, we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 17th Amendment and examining representation and enfranchisement more broadly. Our next program in this series is Wednesday, August 26th, which is Women's Equality Day, and Jen Dederick will share her illustrated history book, She the People, A Graphic History of Uprisings, Breakdowns, Setbacks, Revolts, and Enduring Hope on the Unfinished Road to Women's Equality. There's a sign-up link. I'll add that to the chat box towards the end of this presentation. Tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome back Anne Barrett. Anne is Vice President of the Topsfield Historical Society, an actor, playwright, and award-winning storyteller dedicated to making history interesting for audiences by researching and writing her own lectures and theater productions. So now I am going to welcome Belva Lockwood.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming this evening. I've just returned from a very successful campaign trip out to Michigan, but I am pleased to be back in the Northeast to share my story. I cannot vote, but I can be voted for. Let me say that again. I cannot vote, but I can be voted for. So you gentlemen joining us today, you can and should vote for me as the best candidate for the social and economic welfare of our great country. And ladies, encourage your husbands and sons and brothers and fathers to do what is right and fair in the interest of all citizens. Women before me, accept that as your role until such time as you yourselves are able to vote. A time we hope and pray that is not far off as we continue our struggle for equality, a struggle so well reflected in this song. Our country now from thee claim we our liberty in freedom's name. Guarding homes, altar fires, daughters of patriot sires, their zeal our own inspires justice to claim. Women in every age for this great heritage tribute have paid. Our birthright claim we now, longer refuse to bow. On freedom's altar now our hand is laid. Sons, will you longer see mothers on bended knee for justice pray? Rise now in manhood's might to speed the dawning light. With earth's true souls unite of freedom's day. Our garnered sheaves we yield, gleaned from each glorious field. Women have wrought truth's standard rising high, ready to do or die, enriching life for I with deed and thought Grateful for freedom won, to work so well begun, patriot by thee. And it shall never be until from sea to sea chorused the song shall be, women are free. That song was just recently sung at the National Women's Suffrage Association convention. Even at an early age, I had a firm belief in my own worth and powers. I never for a moment stopped to consider whether a particular labor was such as women were accustomed to do, but only whether I had the ability to perform it. Of course, with this tendency in mind, I was constantly running into difficulties. At about 10 years of age, I had read the Bible through, but I read it as a child reads, believing literally in all that it contains. I supposed faith only was necessary for the reenactment of the miracles of Scripture. Believing that I might have this faith with a proper disposition of mind, I undertook to perform these miracles, and of course, ingloriously failed. My effort at walking on water resulted in a sad wetting of my pantalettes and a severe scolding from my mother. My next effort was to raise the dead. And for this purpose, I selected a neighboring burying ground and the child of a neighbor who had just been recently interred. But the grave, well, it did not open, as in the case of Lazarus, and my self-esteem, well, it received another severe shock. I attributed these failures to want of either sufficient understanding or sufficient concentration, and still supposed that someday I should be able to accomplish these miracles. Determined to succeed, I selected a small hill and concentrated all my willpower upon it. But the hill did not move. I may not have raised the dead as a child, but I can stand before you today and say with confidence that I have awakened the living. As the Equal Rights Party candidate, I promise to promote and maintain equal political privileges for every class of our citizens, irrespective of sex, color, or nationality. In order to make America in truth what it has so long been in name, the land of the free and the home of the brave. If elected, I shall recommend in my inaugural speech a uniform system of laws as far as is practical for all the states, and especially for marriage and divorce, and the laws of distribution of estates that will make the wife equal to the husband in authority and right, and an equal partner in the common business. I am committed to protecting and fostering American industries by achieving a fair balance between tariffs and free trade that will serve the working men and women of this country. I will also urge the extension of commercial relations with all foreign countries and work to establish a high court of arbitration to which commercial and political differences can be referred, putting an end to the horrors of war. I support citizenship for Native Americans. I fully support temperance. My esteemed opponents, Democrat Grover Cleveland and Republican James Blaine, don't dare take a stand on any of these issues, but rather spend all their time in taunts and rebuttals against one another. Wouldn't you rather elect a president who stands for something and will get things done? But before we go any further, let me tell you about myself so that you may understand the road that led me here today, standing here before you in 1884. I was born Belva Ann Bennett in Royalton, New York on October 24th, 1830. My parents, Louis and Hannah Green Bennett, were hard-working farmers eking out a living in the northwest corner of New York State, a territory that had only opened up at the beginning of the century. I was the second of 5 children, 4 boys, 4 girls, and a boy. Farming is hard work. My father relied on all of us to labor. And yet, even then, despite my love of my father, I perceived that to be a woman, even while doing a man's work, meant that I did not receive the full credit for my tireless endeavors, even in my own family. My father did not encourage me in my studies, and yet he was glad enough for me to excel to them in such an extent that I was offered an instructor's position by the local school board so that I could contribute to the family coffers. It was while teaching that I came face to face with the first of many instances where women were not treated equally to men. As a female instructor with exactly the same workload and exactly the same responsibilities, I received half the pay that a male teacher received for no other reason but my misfortune to be a woman. But the experience of employment set my imagination to working, and I began to think of leading a life different from my mother and my aunts, a life enjoyed only up until that time by men. I asked permission to return to school, but my father, well, he did not value education for women, and he declined my request. What was there then for me to do except follow the trodden path of womanhood? I married, and I married well. My husband, Uriah McNall, was the son of a well-to-do man in the area. We settled down to farming, and Uriah ran a small sawmill as well. When I think back on it, it seems ironic that while I was leaving my dreams of independence behind, that same year, 1848, 68 women, including the well-known suffragists Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, signed a declaration of sentiments which set forth the unequal treatment which women were forced to live under and called for immediate reparation of these inequalities. This document, the first of its kind, I feel is so illustrative of the circumstances of women at the time of my coming of age that I want to read it to you. Not in its entirety, but a little bit of it. Such has been the patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. The history of mankind is a history of repeated usurpations and injuries on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men. Having deprived her of the elective franchise, he has oppressed her on all sides. He has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she earns. He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction which he considers most honorable to himself, such as theology, medicine, and law. He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, colleges being closed against her, and so on. I share this with you so that you can understand all that I was up against in the ensuing years. This historic document was being drafted just 100 miles away from where I was taking up the yoke of domestic toil as the only option open to me. Women organizing themselves and acting independently as those women in 1848 did. Well, this was a new concept. Organizing and acting independently from men. And it went against society's opinion of a woman's place. A lady's advice booklet, published the exact same year, 1848, advised women on proper behavior, because a woman's appearance, behavior, and reputation were all she really had to rely upon to get her by in the world. According to this booklet, a lady's behavior in the street should be modest, dignified, yet pleasant and engaging. Never stare, never giggle, never walk or with a wriggle or side-to-side swing. Ladies may not upon any ordinary occasion accept the arm of any male, but a male relative or an accepted suitor. And any male presenting a question beyond the most basic of necessary questions to a lady, well, that should be considered a gross insult and repelled with proper spirit. This was the world into which I came of age. Had not my life taken a sharp turn, I might not be here before you today. Uriah, my husband of only 4 years, departed this life. I was left alone to fend for myself and our 3-year-old daughter, Laura. And it took much subterfuge to get my way when I declared that I would return to school and get an education to fit me for some occupation that would support me and Laura. Among the naysayers were friends, family, my own father, who said that education for a woman was improper and unwomanly. I was reminded that married women were not to attend school, even if they were widows. That it was unheard of and an unusual thing. Well, what did I expect to make of myself? And other such impertinent questions were posed to me. But I was not as tractable at 22 as I had been at 18. I completed the academic year. I then asked to teach the winter school in my neighborhood, but was promptly told by the trustees that they had already employed a man for the winter session. The winter sessions were considered to be the more important, and women were more likely to get summer sessions if employed at all. Well, the winter term had only half elapsed when those same trustees presented themselves before me and informed me that they had dismissed their male teacher and begged that I would come and accept control of the school, which I did. I raised enough money to enroll at Genesee College, which was experimenting in coeducation. I left Laura with my parents while I pursued my goal and graduated with honors in 1857. Life at Genesee was not easy. The hours were long, discussion between the sexes was discouraged, socializing nearly non-existent. Sometimes I slipped away to a local law office to hear lecturers who would be brought in to speak. It was at that time that I had the pleasure of my first encounter hearing Susan B. Anthony. After graduation, I accepted a position and taught at the Lockport Union School in New York. Once again, forced to accept lower pay because of my gender. But I raised enough money so that I was able to bring my younger sister Inverno and Laura to Lockport, and I was able to support the 3 of us. I was finally independent. You could say that my early achievements were partly due to my own personality and drive, certainly, and partly to the changing roles of women in civic life leading up to the middle of the century. 18th century women tended to hearth and home, and had little to do with public life. But by the time of my birth in 1830, female literacy was on the upswing, and many women were taking an active interest in their communities and in social and political reform, albeit in ways that were appropriate to their station in life. I joined the Methodist movement, which is very progressive on the subject of women's roles in society. In 1850, I came to know and respect Susan Anthony as a devoted supporter of temperance and women's rights. In the early years, we shared a warm relationship over our common interest in female education. I have always believed that education is the key to improving women's standing in society. I've actually put forth a precept, radical to many I know, that a woman should be able to support herself before she thinks of entering into marriage. I worked at several schools in New York State whose principals, well, they did not share my views. One forbade me from taking the girls skating for exercise on the grounds that it was immodest and irreligious. What I really desired was a school of my own, where I could test out all the ideas and theories bubbling inside of me. And at length, I purchased a school, which I ran for 3 years before selling it for double what I paid for it. It was during this time while I was teaching that the Civil War broke out. War is distasteful to me under any circumstances. I was opposed to slavery, but I deplored the methods to which we were compelled to resort for its eradication. The fearful cruelties and costs of war. And I would have much preferred a peaceful arbitration to the sad carnage that followed. But no woman's advice was asked about the war. No woman voted a subsidy to maintain it. Though all over the land, north and south, women's hearts were wrung over the loss of loved ones whom they were powerless to protect. A war waged without the consent of a majority of the persons who are called upon to maintain it is unjust and tyrannical. It is my belief that with the financial outlay necessary to conduct the war, the freedom of every slave could have been purchased. The field of education brought me much gratification, but still, I knew I could do more with my life. And now that Laura was becoming a young woman, I decided it was time to do something completely new. I moved to Washington, D.C. In 1866, Washington wasn't a place for people to live, but rather to pass through while in office or conducting business. It wasn't the fine city that Philadelphia or Boston was. It was dirty and transient. And at the close of the Civil War, it was seething with activity as the country moved to put the war behind it and chart a new future. It was exciting. I took a job at a young ladies' school to support myself. The position's limited hours gave me ample opportunity to look around and see what was happening. I often sat in the newly opened ladies' gallery in the Senate and in the Supreme Court chambers when it was in session, just to see the legal and political questions of the day unfold before me. It was there that I began to dream of a life far beyond teaching. Despite my family's pressure on me to join them in Illinois, I decided that Washington was where my future lay. I had always been interested in the Constitution, the law, and political life. I noted that for many men, the path to greatness incorporated the study of law. I also noted that the political sphere afforded many opportunities. I made what was perhaps a bold move. I put myself forward for a position in the consulate at Ghent. I studied the language, the politics, everything that I would need to know in order to be successful in this position. And yet, if you can believe it, President Andrew Johnson did not even deign to respond to my application. Most likely it was because I was a woman, although his impeachment followed quickly thereon, so perhaps he was otherwise engaged. After more than 15 years of widowhood, I married Belva Lockwood, 30 years my senior, and a man of high principle and an advocate for women. I gave up the school and began reading Blackstone's commentaries, which is all about English law. I followed on with Kent's commentaries, all about American law. I could not quench my thirst for the subject. And after attending with Ezekiel the opening lecture of the brand new Columbian College Law School, I presented myself as a registrant, fee in hand, and was refused. My petition was presented to the college faculty, and I received a letter several weeks later informing me that I was not welcome at their institution, as I would prove a distraction to the young men students. Once again, the welfare and progress of women gave way to the wishes of men. The next year, the National University Law School opened, and wonder of wonders, women were invited to enroll, which I did, along with 15 other females, many of whom I must confess, I do not think that they knew what they were signing themselves up for. Of the 15 initial enrollees, only myself and one other finished the completed course. At first, we were allowed to attend all the lectures right along with the men. But then they began to protest. They did not want us in the lectures, and so we were told that we could no longer attend the lectures, but that we could study along. And this we did. And then when it came to graduation time, the men put up a great protest at the idea of sharing the graduation podium with females. And so we were denied receipt of our degrees. In spite of this setback, I petitioned the bar of the DC Supreme Court for admission. I underwent a rigorous 3-day examination by a committee. But then they refused to take action. I petitioned again and again. I was put through 3 days of examination, but this new committee also refused to act. After a time, I presented myself along with my fee to Georgetown University, but I was declined. I attended some courses at Howard University, and in the meantime, I was already practicing, taking on cases and trying them before some more progressive judges who consented to let me come before them. However, I was limited by my lack of a degree and admittance before the bar. Finally, in 1873, as desperate as I was, I sent a letter to President Ulysses Grant, who was the ex officio president of the National University Law School. And I said, and I quote, "Sir, you are or you are not president of the National University Law School. If you are its president, I desire to say to you that I have passed through the curriculum of study in this school and am entitled to and demand my diploma. If you are not its president, then I ask that you take your name from its papers and not hold out to the world to be what you are not." I did not receive a direct response, but my degree arrived in short order. The District of Columbia Bar thus admitted me, though several judges told me outright that they had no confidence in me, a reaction I have experienced repeatedly. When I tried to gain admission to the Maryland bar, a judge lectured me that God himself had determined that women were not equal to men and never could be. When I tried to respond on my own behalf, he said I had no right to speak and had me removed from the court. Nonetheless, I already had cases lining up. Between the sympathy that I drew from many, the great confidence of many of my friends and colleagues, and the publicity that I had received throughout the process. Ironically, I didn't have to wait for cases like those young male lawyers who had refused to graduate with me. My troubles were not over, though. When I sought to gain admission to the Court of Claims after the justices filed in, there was an uncomfortable pause, and then Justice Drake said, "Mistress Lockwood, you are a woman." For the first time in my life, I began to realize that it was a crime to be a woman. I at once pled guilty to the charge. Nothing was resolved, and the case was continued to the following week when the justice put forth a new accusation. "Mistress Lockwood, you are a married woman." That almost took my breath away. But I collected myself and responded with a wave of my hand toward my husband. "Yes, may it please the court, but I am here with the consent of my husband." Well, apparently it did not please the court, and the petition dragged on week after week until at last the decision came down. The court said, "The position of this court is that under the laws and Constitution of the United States, a court is without power to grant such an application, and that a woman is without legal capacity to take the office of attorney." Well, that dampened my sails some, but I continued to do legal work and employed counsel to appear on my behalf whenever necessary, while I waited the 3 years necessary to apply to appear before the US Supreme Court. A lawyer in good standing may, after being at the state's bar for a period of 3 years, could be admitted to the Supreme Court bar. I read the wording very carefully. It didn't say male lawyer or man or anything that would preclude me. More fool was I. In response to my application to the Supreme Court bar, the court rendered the opinion, "As this court knows no English precedent for the admission of women to the bar, it declines to admit unless there shall be a more extended public opinion or special legislation." No English precedent? What about Victoria, Empress of India, or Queen Elizabeth I? If they wanted the question legislated, I was going to make sure that they got it. After 2 bills written by men on my behalf failed to pass, I drafted one myself. By this time, many newspapers were interested in the affair and pledged to help me in any way that they could. I got a sponsor to put the bill forth, and after a protracted, stressful period, where it could have gone either way, I resorted to meetings and lobbying and other tactics to get them to vote in favor. And it was a success. The bill admitting women to the bar of the United States Supreme Court was signed into law in February of 1879 by President Rutherford Hayes. Shortly thereafter, I became the first woman to be admitted to the Supreme Court bar. This served to open up opportunities for women to appear in federal and state courts throughout the land. Sadly, my husband Ezekiel did not live to see it. He had passed on 2 years before, leaving me once again a widow. But he would have been so proud. For many years, I have supported myself and my family with legal work, such as pension claims brought by veterans, where I have made a difference in the lives of so many. So many veterans were owed pensions, and yet time dragged on and on and on, and still they waited, and more papers and more legalities, but still no money. I was able to represent them and make a difference and get the money for them that they so needed. But I know that there is a greater role that I can fill in bringing about equality, justice, and fairness to all in this great nation. Receiving the nomination in August from the Equal Rights Party was directly in line with my aspiration to affect change in a wider sphere. As a candidate, I have received my share of ridicule, but that does not bother me, for I expect to be treated in the like fashion to the other candidates, and none is above the satire of the day. However, I will say that the newspapers received my September 3rd letter of acceptance of the nomination with respect, one going so far as to say that if the letter had been available earlier, and I quote, the other candidates might have had benefit of perusing it and framing their several epistles in accord with its pith and candor. Democrat Grover Cleveland and Republican James Blaine are, of course, the front-running candidates, though for years there has not been much to choose between them when it comes to policy and philosophy. My Superior Court ally, Benjamin Butler, is running as a greenback. And then, of course, there's the Prohibition Party, and their candidate is John St. John. We of the Equal Rights Party support prohibition, but we have a broader agenda of social and political justice. As you might imagine, much is being made of my gender in this election. There are some who say Victoria Woodhull was the first woman to run for president in 1872. And yes, she did have some posters made, but she didn't meet the minimum age. And by the time the election actually took place, she was on no ballots. And I believe she might have been in prison for another reason. However, at any rate, I will leave it to the history books to decide who was the first woman to run for president. I have received much correspondence at my residence on F Street in Washington, a 20-room building that houses my offices, my home, and I also have rooms to let. Some of the correspondence is congratulatory. More want to know some of my views on various topics. Others are scornful that a woman should undertake such an unfeminine role in public life. One, though, amused me so greatly that I sent it along to the newspapers. A male admirer wrote thus, "O Belva Anne, fair Belva Anne, I know that thou art not a man, but I shall vote, take off my coat, and work for thee, fair Belva Anne. For I have read what thou hast said, and long I've thought upon thy plan. Oh no, there is none beneath the sun who'd rule like thee, my Belva Anne." I've crisscrossed this nation making campaign speeches, and I'm proud of the fact that unlike my opponents, people paid to attend many of my speeches. In actuality, at the close of my campaign, my accounts will be in the black and my campaign costs fully covered. Those attending my speeches expecting only to hear about women's suffrage have been disappointed, as I spoke about the many issues facing our country, including tariffs, free trade, and temperance. My running mate, Marietta Stowe, you may know as the publisher of the Women's Herald and a founder of the Equal Rights Party. Together, our many supporters are managing to get our ballot into several states. As you know, there is not a single ballot system here in America, but rather each state has their own balloting. And each party must get enough electors, state by state, to get their ballot into that particular state. And our ballot is in many states. You might think that I have the full support of my fellow suffragists, but sadly, that is not the case. I mourn the erosion of my relationships with those such as Susan Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They and others see me as too radical, and feared that my candidacy will harm the suffrage movement by opening it up to ridicule. They support other candidates in the belief, false I think, that these other candidates will take up the suffrage cause. I do not think their faith is warranted. I am not content to simply aspire to equality, asking those in power to grant it. I believe that in running for president, I am reaching out and grasping that equality to which women are entitled equally. A sentiment well described in this particular song, a favorite of mine. Of all the songs that have been sung within the states and nation, there's not that comes so near the heart as Uncle Sam's relation. Yankee Doodle is his name, U.S. his honored station. Red and white and starry blue, his garb on each occasion. When Uncle Sam set up his house, he welcomed every brother. But in the haste of his new life, he quite forgot his mother. Now his house is up in arms, and keeper he must find him. Sweep and dust and set to rights the tangles all about him. Uncle Sam is long in years, and he is growing wiser. He now can see 'twas a mistake to have no misadviser. Yankee Doodle will be glad to join with us in spreading this news abroad o'er all the land of Uncle Sam's great wedding. While I am ever hopeful, I do not know if I will win the presidential bid. Maybe at best I will get a few thousand votes, especially as it is likely that the voting will be tampered with in some states. But I will have demonstrated that a woman may, under the Constitution, not only be nominated, but elected. Do I believe that the time will come when a woman will assume our nation's highest office? If a woman demonstrates that she is fitted to be president, she will someday occupy the White House. It will be entirely on her own merit now. No movement can place her there simply because she is a woman. It will come if she proves herself fit for the position. In closing, I return to the words of Abigail Adams, written over 100 years ago, still relevant today. While her husband, John, was attending the Continental Congress, Abigail wrote to him saying, if particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves accountable or bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. I believe that day has come. As to my own future, I don't claim to be clairvoyant, but I expect to be continuing my law practice well into the next century, working on behalf of the United Peace Union, trying to bring about world peace and arbitration, representing Indians' rights, and continuing to be an active political and social figure well into my old age. Who knows? Perhaps maybe I will run again in 1888. And while it's likely I will not live long enough to see women win the right to vote, I think that it cannot be too far off if we collectively continue to fight for the right so poignantly reflected in this ballad. I have a neighbor, one of those not very hard to find, who knows it all without debate and never change their mind. I asked him what of woman's rights, he said in tones severe, my mind on that is all made up, keep woman in her sphere. I saw a man in tattered garb forth from the grog shop come. He squandered all his cash for drink and start his wife at home. I asked him, should not woman vote? He answered with a sneer, I've taught my wife to know her place, keep woman in her sphere. I'm an earnest, thoughtful man, not many days ago, who pondered deep all human law, the honest truth to know. I asked him what of woman's cause, the answer came sincere. Her rights are just the same as mine, let woman choose her sphere. And so I am asking you before me to help me choose my sphere, to attain the chosen sphere that I have selected for myself, so that I may strive on your behalf to achieve equality and justice for all. Vote for Belva Lockwood for president. Thank you.
Thank you, Belva. Thank you very much. Now, if anybody has any questions, if they would leave their video off and maybe unmute just their microphone, we'll see if we can answer them one at a time. What I'll do is maybe I'll call on you as I see your microphone is off, if anyone has any questions. Okay, all right. Han, do you have
Hi.
a question?
Yes, you had a very engaging performance, but to be honest, I was Googling while you're performing just to read up on Belva Lockwood to see what some of these things that she did in her life was true or not. And her kind of, I don't know, you mentioned this incident when she was younger and she was trying to raise the dead, and that appears to be true. Was that something she did because of her fanciful nature as a child, or did she have like a legitimate reason for doing that?
She actually, she did write about the reason that we know this, and there's a lot that we don't know about Belva, because unfortunately her son burned all her papers after her passing. But she did write some articles, and that was one of the articles, and she wrote about her experience. And I simply think it's an illustration of the type and strength of her personality. And I think it's a good description of the kind of person that she was.
Does anyone else have any questions they would like to ask Belva? Oops, I see a few. Okay, Charlotte?
Well, it was really, since people weren't asking questions, I just wanted to say my grandmother in the early 1900s was part of the movement in New York, and this was so meaningful for me. And I love the poetry that was written to her and the music. Thank you so much. It was so enlightening and inspiring.
Welcome, thank you.
The Grant family?
Hi, Belva. We're wondering, what did your daughter think when you were going through all of this and running, and did she happen to follow in your footsteps at all?
Laura unfortunately passed in the later 1800s, but she worked in the office and was supportive throughout her life. She did not become a lawyer herself.
Sally? I wanted to say what a very good performance it was, especially with the additional singing, which was very delightful. And so good luck to you as you continue your tour.
Belva for president.
Yeah.
Kathleen? I see Kathleen. Yep.
Yes. Hello, Belva. I enjoyed your life story. I wonder if you could tell me what accounts for your perseverance throughout the years when you were denied so many things by the current laws and the opinions of men, you know, the way the society was set up. And, you know, women are still fighting for equality today. So what kept you going at that time during the, you know, the mid to late 1800s, and to think that you could actually achieve, to have a goal and a dream that you could actually achieve what you wanted to achieve when there was so much in your way?
Well, as I pointed out early on in my campaign speech, as a child, or even as a young woman, I did not stop to think whether something was something that a woman would do or not do, or it was fitted for, but rather whether I, myself, as a person, was able and capable of doing that particular thing. And so when you see something before you that you know you are able to do, even if others are not supportive, you still continue on and you work toward that. And of course, I had Laura, you know, a child, my own daughter, who I would want to have her see what, you know, that we don't give up, we keep going. And then, of course, when I married Ezekiel, and other friends and such, but Ezekiel was very supportive as well. And I learned that I could not move mountains, at least not physical ones, but perhaps if I persevered, I could move some metaphorical mountains.
Well, thank you for your perseverance. You certainly did pave the way for women who came after you. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Belva? Oops, I see one. Han, do you have a question again?
Hi, can you tell me something about your choices for vice president?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us something about your choices for your vice president?
I hadn't gotten that far. It was Marietta Stowe and I were running together. Marietta actually was the person who, she was the one who suggested that I be, even though she had founded the party, she suggested that I be the front runner, the president, and that she would be the vice president. But she was the founder of the Equal Rights, well, one of the founders of the Equal Rights Association, Equal Rights Party. So she was a logical choice, and she was the one who actually put my name forward. So in a way, she almost came before I did. But I was happy to accept the nomination as running for president.
The Grant family, do you have another question?
Yes, I'm just curious if you have a sense for how the 1884 election went and if you're thinking about running again.
I believe that I am going to get several thousand votes, and I will run again in 1888, but I will not fare as well that time.
Thank you.
I think that's all I see, but I have a question. What happened to the National Equal Rights Party?
It eventually got absorbed into something else, I believe, down the road.
Thank you. All right, I think that is it. Belva, thank you very much for coming, and we really appreciated that you ran for president, that you set a path for women, and let's be hopeful in the future. I'm going to put the, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Sheila, did you have a question? No. Ace or Alan, did you have a question?
No, we just started clapping, that's all.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anne. That was Anne Barrett. We really appreciate you coming tonight. And that was a wonderful performance.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I am also going to put in the link, as I promised, in the chat box for the next program, which, as I said, is this Wednesday, August 26th. So I will put, actually, Melissa, if you could type that in there, that'd be great.
Sure thing.
Okay. I'm going to stop recording.